All right, folks, welcome to a brand new series that Mark Steves from Ultimedia United, that Camden and myself are hoping you will enjoy. Now, the idea was brought to us by Mark. We don't want to take the credit when we didn't have anything to do with the origination of this, but the concept here is that we are going to be investigating, delving, and learning the different aspects and esoteric, scientific, and many other angles of the elements on the periodic table. Now, granted, I do want to say the first 10-20 minutes of this episode, since it's the first time we started doing this, and we did come with notes, but in terms of the conversation and the way it was going to go, we believe in a free-flowing form of conversation. We really took care of doing our best to try and understand the principalistic foundations of this particular element, and in this episode, it is fluorine. Now, I will say, though, that throughout the second half, throughout halfway and the latter half of this episode, which all of it is going to be public and free, by the way, it gets really, really good. Without further ado, I highly suggest that you folks check it out. Give it a shot. Let us know what you think. Cheers. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another long-form conversation. I usually say interview, but it turns out to be more of a conversation when we have such a fine gentleman like Mark come on. Today, we will be diving into a handful of, I guess, understanding the elements relative to what's on the periodic table, but taking a much more deeper, I guess you could say, dive down the rabbit hole as it pertains to one particular element today, which is fluorine. Now, before we get into all the fun, esoteric, scientific, and I guess you could say, quote unquote, pseudoscientific aspects of this, just right before I introduce Mark, again, welcome back, brother. Fluorine, according to Wikipedia, is a chemical element with the symbol F and atomic number 9. It is the lightest halogen and exists at standard conditions as a highly toxic, pale yellow diatomic gas. As the most electronegative element, it is extremely reactive as it reacts with all other elements except for argon, neon, and helium, end quote. With that being said, I don't think there's anyone better to bring on to this series. And quite frankly, this was Mark's idea to begin with, than Mark himself. Brother, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I couldn't imagine a better show to have this series on because, like I've said before, you guys do a great job of researching, so I'm excited to take part in it. I will admit that maybe I'm from more of the intuitive angle on this particular subject, but that's
Absolutely
partly why I wanted to undertake this because, life is a process and growing and changing. So I try to strive to challenge myself. So this is going to be a challenge, but a fun challenge.
And it's going to be
pumped.
Yeah. Right, and it's going to be great as of course we're recording this in real time with the audience watching. We can do all this stuff and learn as we go, and yeah, I mean this is going to be great. So enough of me. Is there anything specifically you'd like to start off with as it pertains to this element, or?
Well, I think most people are going to hear the word fluorine and automatically know maybe where my take lies. It's going to be on the fluoride, but it's important to understand the element first before we even get into fluoride itself, particularly sodium fluoride, which is what most people in our community know is bad. Most people will tell you it's banned in Europe, it's banned in other countries. There's studies that show it lowers IQ. Very new age people will tell you that it blocks your third eye. So I think that that's stuff we can get to towards the end, hopefully.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to find out what you guys have learned about fluorine.
Well, first off, here's the thing that I found to be the most consistent with some of the background research I was doing in preparation of this episode. When we jump back to Wikipedia, where it says fluorine is a chemical element with the symbol F, atomic number, it is the lightest halogen and exists at standard conditions as a highly toxic, pale yellow diatomic gas. It is the most electronegative element. It is extremely reactive as it reacts with all other elements except for obviously neon, argon, and helium. One thing I found so peculiar about this is that it seems as though there are certain aspects of fluorine that are in a certain way could be bioengineered or biomanufactured at the not just molecular level, but at the nano level. And I know what, saying nano, people think, okay, what sizes, what are you
Right.
talking about? Very small, extremely small atomic substructure small. I'm speaking in this particular case of the subatomic structure, excuse me. I found consistencies between certain individuals. For example, when Jacques Vallée and James Fox went on Joe Rogan saying that, some of this magnesium and some of these metallurgies and things like that are metals that you could find on, Mars, on Venus, on Earth and other planets. It's not uncommon. It's more the way in which the subatomic structure is organized. And interestingly enough, on the surface level within the public academia of science, at least to my understanding and the breadth of my grasp of this, there is no device, mechanism, apparatus that could restructure at a subatomic level in the way in which Mr. Vallée was referring to these types of, I guess you could say, elements, if you want to call it. Now, what I find interesting and peculiar is that, again, this kind of works to the benefit of the cover-up of different esoteric, intuitive, spiritual phenomenons. But I find that the sheer convenience of all these metallurgies and all these elements and things like that being available on to the public domain as some sort of just, as an element really is not great for people like us, because again, to be able to reorganize the subatomic structure within that of the substrate of these elements is very hard to do publicly, if even possible at a public level. So what I'm trying to say is that it's great for those trying to keep these things a secret, because it's not so much about keeping the elements a secret, but more so what you can do with it secret, right? So you now have that dissonance between those that know and those that don't know. So what I found there, again, not pretending to be a scientist by any stretch of the metric, but it seems to me that fluorine actually is harnessed within certain, you could argue, ion propulsion generators of anti-gravity craft, within certain, I guess you could say, apparatuses that harness different forms of electromagnetic waves and energy. And the fact that fluorine is a very what was the term here?
Reactive. It is one of the most reactive elements on the periodic table,
while being the most electronegative. That I find that to be a very allocated and delegated, I guess you could say, tool or mechanism.
That's a really, really good thing for combining it with other elements and then creating an output of energy. It anytime it combines with something, it becomes a different kind of stable nucleotide, I think is what you call it when they're combined, or compound, and it has to change its positive negative like structure because it's combining to do so. So it literally has to expend energy, as I understand it, right? I have no idea. I'm dumb. But to do the combination, it has to expend energy. So that's really convenient for it to be really reactive and always going to output a positive energy, because it is always negative to begin with.
Right. And that can, again, delving more into the spiritual esoteric aspect, that could be both beneficial or negative for certain entities within a certain electromagnetic vicinity. Depending on what devices or apparatuses would be placed around it, I'm speaking of in my mind the visualization of people attempting to, summon certain spiritual entities. Whether good or bad is not for me to say, but just the idea of even summoning them, being able to use fluorine in certain ways in the electromagnetic spectrum that we do not have access to publicly in terms of the tools to do that is to be honest, is very exciting, but also very frightening. But what do you think, Mark?
Well, I think the point you made about its size is very interesting, because that's the same point they make about sodium fluoride. They tell you just don't swallow it, but it's such a small particle that, it's immediately getting absorbed into your mucous membranes in your mouth. So anybody who's using fluoride toothpaste is essentially getting a version of this fluorine, an extremely reactive element, and that's going into your membranes because of its size and doing, well, allegedly, a lot of things that we'll get into after we sort of get the more tangible side of it out of the way, or maybe the material side of it.
Right. I mean, personally, I do believe that this element, from my research, is used in very particular types of craft that the I guess you could say the military industrial complex is working on entirely off the record in black budgets, special access programs, you name it. It seems like it has a very, again, could be used, like you said, Camden, and compounded in so many different ways, but also seems like it's delegated towards a handful of specific tasks relative to the I guess, weapons, craft, apparatuses being
It is.
developed. Yeah.
Because it is verifiably no even speculation conspiracies here. It was one of the key components in the atomic reaction of the first atomic bombs of the Manhattan Project. It literally made that thing go boom. It's more explosive. Make sure I say it right. Which one? It's more explosive than potassium. Potassium can catch on fire if the air is too humid. It is a reactive ass chemical or element. Sorry.
And if you were to, in a hypothetical world, set a certain vicinity where the electromagnetic spectrum and waves have been altered, again, interestingly enough, within that of the craft they're building or something of the sort, it would explain how this anti-gravity or reality engine, as Bruce Fenton likes to call it, would work. I could tell, Camden, by your face. What did you?
No, I do. I mean, I have a web page pulled up, just talking points about it. I hadn't gotten so far down, but it reacts with oxygen in the sense that it can pull oxygen out of the water. It also is one of the only things on Earth that can react with diamonds. Like this is a very, very interesting element just on a pure like public science level, right? Much less talking about, the fluorides, things that they don't really admit is doing what it's doing and in the water. Like it's just it's a wow chemical because it doesn't occur naturally on Earth. The only place that you can find it happening on Earth is coming out of volcanoes.
Right.
Like on its own. We've been able to synthesize it and stuff we've been able to synthesize it, but the only place it occurs naturally is coming out of, well, I'm not saying hollow earth vents, but like, kinda, right?
I mean, it would certainly, as Mark was saying, to sort of finish up on the sort of tangible side of it, it would certainly explain amongst many other things, I'm sure, the UFOs coming and going in and out of volcanoes and things of the sort, right? So again, to see, again, that could be speculated for a number of multitude of different things, but yeah.
I was not expecting this angle, but I love it because sodium fluoride, again, going back to like the side of it that I researched, it became ubiquitous in the United States after the 1940s. And you guys both know what happened in 1943, Roswell.
Right.
We have all this alien activity ramping up around then. And this fluorine, obviously extremely important when it comes to the Manhattan Project, but all of the alien messages that people get around that time was like this space communism, give up your nukes message, where the light beings would come and say, oh, you have to give up the nukes. We'll save you. We'll come and rescue if you give up the nukes. Meanwhile, we have footage of them like coming down and beaming the nuclear warhead and disabling it. So I think that's a whole nother tangent, but it is curious how much UFO activity is surrounding this time period and this element.
I agree. I may take a little Lou Elizondo perspective here, but okay, we just talked about hollow earth. That's where fluorine comes out of. It seems like they don't like atomic weapons. What if they're really greedy and they really want all their fluorine, and they don't like that we're using fluorine to make our things, our anti-gravity, our reality engines, our atomic bombs? We're like stealing their element that they use in hollow earth kind of thing. So, I mean, it could be even a different perspective that way. They're just like really, really greedy. And I just thought of it when you started saying that, because that's interesting.
Well, it is notable, like, the connections between the Nazis and the OSS. The Nazis were the first people to use sodium fluoride on their prisoners, and then the Soviets did the same thing. And the reason why is because, according to what they said about it, it made people more docile and it made them deteriorate from the inside, which is, they can't afford to keep the lights on in this prison and keep them all fed. They'd rather have them die pretty quickly, I'd imagine, which is really messed up to think about and to say. But yeah, the record is very clear that fluoride has been used in conjunction with these military outfits, the same people that are playing around with UFOs and having secret meetings with the aliens.
I can't help but think that this leads me to, again, not being a scientist by any metric, but I can't help but think that this leads me to some instances that have been, I believe, documented or at least covered in some angle or another by Mr. Bruce Fenton, as he said on a few months back on a long form episode we did together, where he talked about there have been certain stories where abductees have been offered pancakes without sodium on this craft, and they've actually taken, literally they were offered it as food, and then they were allowed to take the pancakes off of the craft when they were returned back to their home or wherever they were placed. And these pancakes were analyzed, investigated, and it turns out there was no sodium in them. And interestingly enough, as presuming I have my memory serves me right and my facts correct, there's supposed to be sodium in them all the time. At least on the surface level, we don't know how to make such food without sodium. And I cannot help but think that, again, not saying fluorine has a direct relation to this, but there's that sort of consistency between, like you said, Camden, it coming out, emitting from volcanoes, UFOs being seen there, these documented cases of abductees having food that are missing such components. I cannot help but think a possible manipulation of fluorine could have led in one way or another, directly or indirectly, to the curation of some of these quote unquote anomalies, if you want to call it.
You're right. So I'm just reading more things because, dude, this is a weird element. Like you picked a damn good one for us to really dig into first, Mark, because it is, when it combines with carbon or sodium, like we just talked about, sodium fluoride, that is the strongest elemental bond on the periodic table. Those two, because it only has a singular one stable isotope. Like, it never degrades, it never has a half-life. It is stable, yet the most explosive reactive. That's just, it's like it's a paradox in existence, even, which is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
The volcanoes are extremely, interesting too. I mean, as they pertain to like cataclysms.
Yeah, it makes me want to go to La Palma right now.
Ironically enough, a UFO was seen coming in and out of La Palma during the explosion. So again, this is just one of thousands of cases where you see UFOs. Again, whether alien, human, interdimensional, it's not for me to say, at least, because I don't know who's in that craft at that time. But again, in some cases, not a craft; it's a spiritual thing, or more esoteric thing. But ultimately, yeah, it's not a coincidence by any stretch.
All right, it's in your refrigerator too. This seems to be like everywhere.
Well, and I'll say it's in Prozac, and it's also in Prozac it's called fluoxetine hydrochloride, and then the chemical name for sarin nerve gas is isopropyl methyl phosphoryl fluoride. So it's very, key to toxins, especially military applied toxins. And then Prozac, which is, an SSRI, it's a serotonin suppressor, I'm pretty sure,
right.
or
no, it is.
Enhancer.
Yeah, you're right.
Serotonin suppressor reuptake inhibitor, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
right.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting because Prozac is completely tied into the whole MK Ultra stuff, and like what they say these celebrities happens to them, like they get like this plastic mindset where, through neuroplasticity, their minds are altered to be more susceptible to whatever programming their, handler wants to program into them, so that they can be the vessel for whatever negative entity or whatever agenda they're going to use this person for.
I couldn't agree more. And on top of that too, it would seem like a perfect way in which a a subtle insertion into, again, food, water, things like that, the daily consumption of things in the public domain would be quite, again, it doesn't seem far-fetched for this to be inserted, especially like you said, that it's been unfortunately used in so many negative ways. It could only, again, to say that there haven't been to say that there are not people out there on a secretive basis or otherwise working on this, or at the maybe at this point have concluded the ways in which this particular element could be curated or manipulated relative to the dimension we live in, I would say is nonsense. To say that people don't know, that they don't know about this. I mean, come on. And the fact that there's been quite a, I guess you could say, lack of public funding behind the certain ways in which this element, again, there's been quite a lack of public funding in many regards, but the way in which this element more specifically seems to be, again, with all the information out there on it, there's also a lot that's been missing, if you want to call it. I give the example similar to Einstein's theory of relativity. Apparently he did solve it before he died, but again, that's the whole thing, leaving the gaps out of the equation in a public sense. But I'm curious, Mark, to see or to hear what you have to say in your perspective as it pertains to the esoteric and intuitive angle of this particular element.
Yeah. Well, before we go there, I think, some people might be interested. Harley Rivers Dickinson, a Liberal Party member of the Victorian Parliament for South Barwon, Australia, made the following statement. It is a matter of record that sodium fluoride has been used for behavior control of populations. At the end of the Second World War, the United States government sent Charles Eliot Perkins, a research worker in chemistry, biochemistry, physiology, and pathology, to take charge of the vast Farven chemical plants in Germany. While there, he was told by German chemists of a scheme which had been worked out by them during the war and adopted by the German General Staff. This scheme was to control the population in any given area through mass medication of drinking water. In this scheme, sodium fluoride will in time reduce an individual's power to resist domination by slowly poisoning and narcoticizing a certain area of the brain, and will thus make him submissive to the will of those who wish to govern him. Both the Germans and the Russians added fluoride to the drinking water of prisoners of wars to make them stupid and docile. So, people will make the argument, well, oh, Mark, you're wrong because sodium fluoride, that's not what they put in toothpaste. They put calcium fluoride, bro. And calcium fluoride is a naturally occurring mineral. Well, that's false, folks, because what they're putting in your toothpaste is not naturally occurring, even though they're going to lie to you about that. It's actually called silicofluoride, aka sodium fluoride. I mean, there's so many different tricks that they can use to, skirt around the weak FDA regulations that are, like I said, weak already. So weak that this sodium fluoride that has also patented use as rat poison and insecticide is, given to children in, cotton candy or bubblegum flavor,
Sorry,
when you go and visit the dentist.
Right. Sorry, Mark, before you go on, I just wanted to say very quickly, for those not aware, for you guys as well as the audience too, the FDA, from my understanding, 75%, and this is a reference from 2 or 3 years ago, according to Forbes, if I'm not mistaken, 75% of the FDA's budget comes from Big Pharma. And when you see that ultimately Big Pharma has what is referred to in legal terms as regulatory capture, I say that with air quotes, on the FDA panel and commission, basically Big Pharma owns the whole fucking thing, essentially. I mean, one can make that argument very strongly. Therefore, wouldn't be that difficult to add to your point, Mark, to insert said, not just elements, but fancy legal lingo in order to covertly just have this, pass on as just something that's not harmful whatsoever.
I mean, yeah. Well, go ahead. No, you're good.
So there's even more evidence for it. I mean, take a look, folks. We're all around the same age. I'm sure you guys have grandparents that are still alive. 3 of my grandparents are still alive. And, luckily in one of my grandparents' case, they grew up in Canada on a farm where they probably didn't have fluoride in their tap water. But on the other side of my family, there was Alzheimer's, with my great grandparents. And that is a symptom that's caused by sodium fluoride toxicity. It causes a reduction in the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, damages the hippocampus. It forms beta amyloid plaques, which is what happens when people have Alzheimer's. There's a reduction in lipid content, damage to the Purkinje cells, exacerbation of lesions induced by iodine deficiency, impaired antioxidant defense systems, increased uptake of aluminum, and accumulation of fluoride in the pineal gland. So these are all symptoms of fluoride toxicity, and you can see in the degradation of our elderly populations here in North America, going to these homes and being, in the state of forgetting their lives and forgetting their family members. It's really sad, considering you go to countries where they don't have these modern toxins, and the people who are elderly are wise, they're in tune, they have things to say, they have a message, whereas it seems like, at least my situation around here, like my great grandparents, they got fucked out of that opportunity. Sorry to curse, but that's just the truth of it, by being toxified to the point where they couldn't even remember their own life in their old age. And I'm really grateful that that's not the case for, like I said, my grandparents who did grow up in Canada in a more rural situation.
By the way, very quickly, just to add to that, what I believe you're referring to, what you were reading off there, is what many have within the Department of Defense and now the public knows to be the God gene, which is interesting.
Yeah. There is a video that I did maybe a month or two ago on it. There's a gene in the, you were talking about lipid processes and all those things. There is a
Sorry, if I could add quickly,
Good.
it's been dubbed the God gene due to its alleged reported association with spirituality.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
in 2004, this is according to geneticlifehacks.com. In a 2004 book by Dean Hammer, the VMAT2 gene was hypothesized to be the hereditary influence towards spirituality.
And
Oh,
we're
wow.
not saying it is at all related to the current situation, but there is a verifiable Department of Defense video where they're pitching some of their R&D at some people that we can't tell because it's the back of their heads that you would guess would be investors. And they're talking about how these people that you would maybe call religious fanatics have this part of their brain light up when they're read religious texts. People that you would associate to be materialistic or atheists, that part of their brain does not fire when they're read religious texts. So if you were able to, the person in the audience says, so we would infect them to then kill off that part of the brain like activity. The person presenting then says, well, the actual purpose would be for us to then vaccinate them to kill off this part. So I'm just saying,
Yeah, no,
it's
exactly.
a lot of present day possible connections, which is interesting, where this all connects back to what it helps in your brain. You talked about Alzheimer's, you talked about Parkinson's, things like that, that a VMAT2 degradation like almost always makes happen in a person is a really easy way to do it. This fluoride thing that we're talking about, that's interesting. It at least helps the cause if that's the goal,
Absolutely.
Right.
It's it was just, I made that, oh my god, VMAT2, like when you started talking about all those brain processes and the pineal gland, like that is where the VMAT2 gene works to like literally put a shield around your nucleotides so that they don't get attacked when they're like going through their for other parts of the brain. I can't remember the reaction name right now, but it's literally like a shield. You talk about like the armor of God. Well, it's a spiritual gene that then protects your gene. Like it's a really weird thing that it's very metaphorically and literally tied to this spiritual aspect of it.
Now, in what way can we get back to like
Go ahead, yeah.
how this gene is is spiritual, because I understand
Right. Okay.
there's a part of the brain that lights up when someone has read a religious text, and that part of the brain is associated with people who have this gene trait.
Yes.
So now, what is their thought behind this effect that they're calling the brain lighting up? Like, is it that religious text? Like, I'm wondering, like, because now we need to examine, like, first of all, what religious text is being read.
Yeah, right.
What language, right, is being spoken, and like what I mean, if the person's atheist, obviously it doesn't have effect on them. But like if you're reading in Hebrew to somebody who's from a Buddhist in Thailand, like, is it going to affect them? Probably not. But that's not to say that they don't also have the spiritual gene. So maybe elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
yeah.
As I understood it and found when I was doing this video, I guess my best way to say it, this is one of my favorite metaphors. We spell words, right? So you would then equate saying really anything that you spell out as kind of spelling at someone. So their association, the Department of Defense video did not say this. This was articles that you find after the fact that were making these connections. But it got into mimetic, like viral, basically it's a virus, but it's a mind virus, and how you get into that frequencies and the noises and these vocal cord vibrations that you're making, and it doesn't necessarily matter the actual even understood languages that they're saying at you, but there's something about what you associate, not religious text maybe, because we're not just talking Christianity, but the Rig Vedas, the higher ascending metaphorical ancient texts, I guess is a better way to say it, maybe.
If I could,
there's like go ahead.
I just wanted to say very quickly, if I could jump in, the way I view it is very similar to what you were saying, Camden. But in addition to that, similar to the example I gave at the beginning of this episode pertaining to the way in which certain metallurgies are reorganized at the subatomic level, what we find here is that if we take a look at geneticlifehacks.com, the same reference I used to reference Mr. Dean Hammer, it says here, and I quote, "The book called The God Gene, How Faith is Hardwired into Our Genes, laid out the idea that spirituality is heritable and at least partly due to the VMAT2 gene. The author, Mr. Hammer, suggests that selection for feel-good genes creates optimism for living even though death is inevitable," end quote. For those that don't know what heritable means, basically means that it could be scientifically explained in the way that we understand it to actually be passed on from one individual to another. So what I find interesting is the reason I bring up the subatomic structure so well organized in the certain quote unquote anomalistic metallurgies is because it's almost as if it's that same method or principle of a subatomic organization or reorganization rather is, I guess you could say, composited or inhibits some form of electromagnetic energy within the VMAT2 gene that we just on a public level don't understand. And of course, me being a scientist, not being a scientist, sorry.
I have something actually, but Mark, if you go ahead. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm glad you guys both clarified, because I'm thinking, maybe there's something rhythmically or inherent to the numerical order of these phrases in religious texts that has a effect on the brain that we don't account for. But if it's merely like that, they're saying that there's an optimistic component to this, and that people are living a happy life despite being in a ultimately, it seems like they come from the materialistic perspective of like, we're living in a finite reality, and everything is, trying to survive. That's a different perspective from how I approach things. But I'm curious, you bring up like this idea, and not that you guys brought it up throughout this conversation. I'm getting this idea that like they're almost toxifying us.
Yep.
And toxify and selecting like the for people who have a tendency towards negativity, hate, aggression.
Right.
Oh,
Very quickly before Camden goes, just came into my head as you were saying this, Mark, which thank you, by the way. Um, when we take a look at some of this video of, the Department of Defense talking about removing the God gene and things like that, what I find inherently consistent amongst the different articles I was sifting through prior to doing this recording during research was that the VMAT2 gene specifically had to do with the sort of the feel good aspect of things, and that tie into spirituality I found quite peculiar, because the whole aspect of spirituality, as with life in general, allegedly is to excel, to grow, to learn. And so, like you said, they're toxifying this type of gene. Now again, to be able to try to explain it from a scientific perspective, like solely from a scientific perspective, even to those that understand it in a secretive compartment, may not even be able to, simply because there's such a there's such another side to it esoterically, that, as Einstein said, I believe, don't quote me specifically, but I believe he said religion without science is lame, and science without religion is nothing, something along those lines. I just can't help but think of, again, the Hermetic principles and that whole angle there. But yeah.
Well,
and
so what? Go ahead. No, you got it.
well, I wonder if this was even possible if there wasn't, like, on the other side of things, the, like, acceleration of this hippie love movement with the drugs. Like, they were probably, I mean, obviously turning the soldiers against the citizens, right? All these soldiers are like, wow, these freaking hippies hate us, even though we're saving their country. And then these hippies are like, oh, these freaking war pigs are ruining our country, screw them, and it turns these military people against the citizens, who in their mind are like, oh yeah, they're just all about love and whatever, and like, screw them, because they're not going to help us, beat the Russians. They're totally on that psyop. So there's like these multi-layered psyops going on, but I almost feel like that helps me understand how someone would feel justified to poison a population of people in this way. Like, oh, well, optimism is only hurting our military campaigns, so we need to, toxify optimism out of the brain and destroy spirituality because it has no practical value in our military. I mean, if we're going to look at things from that angle,
Right.
I think maybe that's an explanation. But I think also, like, what I was talking about with Chance from Interverse and someone else last night, off the air, was like archons, and are these archons, using certain chemicals? We were talking about parasites in this one instance, but I wonder if, fluoride being so strange and coming from, well, fluorine coming from volcanoes and like needing to be synthesized, like, what if we had some ET information about that, and then they were like, all right, this is part of the deal, we're going to use people as human experiments, we're going to give you our technologies. And some of these technologies were like crazy chemical applications of these extremely reactive elements like fluorine.
No,
I
yeah,
couldn't agree with you
viable.
more.
Yeah. The just to expand a little bit on what it does and the functionary things of it. So when your brain, your pineal gland produces melatonin, dopamine, serotonin, it's neurotransmitters. Um, the VMAT2 gene forms a protective wall to prevent oxidative stress on those neurotransmitters. So they are able to work with your brain because they don't degrade before they get there. More of them get there, so to speak. And there may be something here to the just like we talked about the spelling of words, vibrational frequencies, all those things. They're wavelengths, right? It gets back into that 0 point field, zero energy thing of everything is technically moving all the time because the electrons in this mouse are moving and vibrating. Even though this is matter, it is actually also energy in and of itself. So everything is energy that you can use to do what you want. And I think a lot of we call it poisoning? Is that what it is? Right? With the fluorine and stuff? Poisoning
Toxification,
of the
whatever.
population is to suppress, make sure they can do totalitarian measures and not get fought back against, to not let people realize my life's bad, but it's worse than yours. But actually, we should, our lives are bad and it's their fault. You know, like you're so down and negative with each other that you never turn to the people that are actually causing it, because you're just so down in the dumps because you're not getting any goddamn serotonin. So like
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways that
And it's a
even
lot
if you,
easier to hook all these people on the big pharma and on opium, like we see the
Mhm.
collapse of our society,
Right,
homelessness, drug use. It's associated with that. I mean, they have to sort of lay the groundwork with something like a fluoridated water supply in order for these big pharmaceutical companies to even have a market.
right,
Right. In addition to that, the VMAT2 gene as well, at least according to, again, geneticlifehacks.com, they have a very nice laid out point by point sort of expose. Also mentioned that also helps enhance locomotion. So we could see that from a public perspective, the attempts to find I believe it was, they said here, synthetic, if you
oh yeah,
will,
right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, if they're attempting to find a sort of synthetic agonist in order to allow for researchers to conduct more experiments has not been the case. But again, you look at the financial side of it, the funding behind it and all that stuff. They say there's good and bad, but it sort of falls into that category of, it depends what you're using it for, depends what you're applying it to in a lab and things like this. And so what I find quite peculiar is, again, the limited public knowledge on this. Meanwhile, we have the DOD over there with a leaked video talking about removing the God gene. So again, if there's not much to know about it, I mean, how do you have such detailed presentations on the matter?
Right. I will give their, because I mean they do their justifications. They wrap things in protect the kids and terrorism, right? So like their justification for this isn't about the benefits of spirituality. They in their presentation focus solely on the fact that religious fanatics will only and always have VMAT2, a high concentration of VMAT2 genes, and this part of their brain will light up and interact with spiritual texts.
Right.
Whereas your atheist materialists will not get fanatical and they won't go blow up a city square. They focus on that kind of terrorism aspect. They never talk about the people that use that spiritual connection for connecting. They really do focus on the everyone that's a terrorist is everyone that's a fanatic. This is happening. So that's how they justify it. So that's
Right.
that's their reasoning, but there's a third class there. So yeah.
Well, I think, all the points that are being made by you guys, I'm extremely blown away. I'm so glad that we picked this as the first one. But to get to the like intuitive spiritual
Yeah.
side of it, I'll
Yes,
just speak
please.
from experience. Ever since taking the steps that I took, let's say maybe 2014 was when I really seriously was like, all right, no more fluoride. I'm not even going to cook pasta with water from the tap.
Right.
And now I've kind of gotten away from that because it's just too expensive to buy bottled water for everything.
Hmm.
But since reducing the amount of fluoride that I'm potentially getting in my body, I've noticed an enhanced clarity of mind,
Mm-hmm.
an enhanced focus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm less drawn to things like video games and television. I'm more drawn to going outside, experiencing things, talking to people. I think part of me discovering like how to really tune into my body and removing all those unnecessary elements like fluoride,
Yeah.
um, it expanded my growth as an individual. So that's going to mean different things for different people. For me,
Right.
that meant becoming more spiritual, but I don't think that necessarily the third eye, even though it is spiritual, it doesn't do that for everyone. I think people who are like, Einstein, who used their mind to do all these thought experiments, he wasn't necessarily a religious person, but his
Right.
third eye was helping him make scientific, quote unquote, theories and innovations. And I think his unified field theory it's definitely something that fits into the electro universe a lot more than it fits into the Newtonian universe. So, you know, it might just be a matter of paradigm there. But to my larger point, it's like whether or not you're an atheist, there's a component of you that's connected to the larger reality. And I think why this stuff has military application is because the forces that be, Team Dark, as Chance called them yesterday, you know, that's a good word instead of they, but Team Dark, in a sense, is trying to keep us trapped here in this third dimension. And they know that spirit is their enemy and we are vessels for spirit. So from a really spiritual perspective, that's kind of what I think's going on. Is it's spiritual warfare, and there are all these elements that you don't take into account because they've worked our culture into a certain way that you just take all this stuff for granted and get toxified and then think that they're your saviors. And you know, with the age of the cooties, you know, everything going on lately, it's like, yeah, I could see how these hospitals are a lot less trustworthy than, you know, we might have thought 20 years ago. So I just I think it's obvious to us now, but I don't think you have to necessarily have a spiritual perspective to benefit from this type of information, you know, because no matter who you are, you don't want to get toxins in your body. I mean, come on. And this element is a toxin. And, you know, the reason why I wanted to start this with you guys, and I think maybe this might be a good place to conclude, unless you guys have more to add, which is totally welcome.
I have one point, but it's not. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's
cool. Well, I do want to hear it, but I want to say, like, something that really opened my mind up when I was a young guy in high school. I asked my science teacher, I said, you know, is the table of elements a fixed set of elements, or are there more elements out there that we haven't discovered yet? And he said, yeah, absolutely. There are elements out there that we haven't discovered yet. You know, he was a younger guy, really open-minded. I don't know if you get that same answer from every science teacher, but that answer really blew my mind open, because I'm like, oh, wow, the table of elements isn't fixed. There's so much, you know, out there that we don't know yet, potentially. And I think even, like, you know, we underestimate how much we know about the elements that are on the table right now. So I think this series of shows, however long it goes, is going to be really cool, because we're going to get into some of the angles, like all the stuff you guys mentioned at the top of the show about fluorine, and then what I added to it on some of the practical applications of fluorine, some of the darker applications of it, because I don't think it really has any beneficial applications. You know, it sounds to me like it's only good for making bombs and poison.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the only, I guess, somewhat optimistic perspective I would take, is that and I would rebut that respectfully, Mark, in the sense that that's just because that's all we've known them to use it for. I wonder if there is some type of, again, not for the sake of speculation, inversion of some kind that could, again, because of the overall concept of whatever this reality, this simulation we live in, you know, being pertaining to the yin and the yang of things, the as above, so below hermetic principles. I wonder if there's a way that this could actually be harnessed, curated, used in a very positive sense, because again, it's like with everything else, it's a double-sided coin, double-edged sword, right? So I don't know, Camden, did you want to
the
jump in?
exact point of that, and then I'll make what I was going to say point. It is those things, bombs, poisons, but in its nature of doing those things stably, it is one of the, if not the most stable compound with anything, because it can react with anything. It can merge electrons with almost any element, diamonds, oxygen, everything almost. So it is maybe used right now to stably hurt people, but theoretically, I guess you could stably do good things with it. To my, I guess, speculation, it could be, I said earlier, it was in the first atom bomb. Well, if we decide that some of these, whoever they are, some versions of UFOs are low energy, like nuclear reactor engines, well, then they would maybe be using things like fluorine to make those reactions happen. So like there is maybe other practical uses to it that isn't this.
I do my only thing before you get to your next point is that if it were to be for as a fact used within that of the development of the hydrogen bomb, the atom bomb, whatever you want to call it, it's interesting because again, if there is some form of nuclear fission or something of the sort pertaining to not just the enrichment of uranium but mercury plasma relative to the propulsion systems used on some of these craft, I wonder if the implementation of that could be churned in a sort of way that would be, I don't want to say positive because again it's all about perception, but more so like we see, certain portals, we see footage of, alleged footage of certain portals being opened in the middle of the sky due to some of the apparatuses these craft have. I wonder if the advancement and taking advantage of that in a way that would be more beneficial to a productive form of esotericism could come about. But again, like to your point though, Mark, we've only seen it used in such negative things. Yeah.
Right. The same way quantum physics stays theoretical.
Right. Yeah.
But my original thing was a lot of this reminded me, you've specifically mentioned 2014, Mark, which is interesting. Dave and I have recently covered a nano domestic quell document that Snowden leaked that specifically states in 2013, we think we can infect 98% of the United States population. By early 2014, we think we will have 99% of the population infected, all the while not saying infected with what.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, because you will like this a lot, actually, next paragraph, it says, we recommend increase in the inflows and outflows of nano domestic quell in these markets. And then it goes Atlanta Municipal, Coca-Cola, Pepsi,
Chicago Municipal,
Chicago, LA Municipal.
It was
increasing
giving
by
the
like
percentage.
9%, 8%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
It was-
adding or not starting, but increasing inflows and outflows of nano domestic quell
And
by
to tell you the
percentage.
truth, I'd pull the document up to share it on my screen for people in the episode to see, but we could get taken down for that document, so I could send it to you privately if you like, because it really adds to, again, this is one of many, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents Snowden leaked. So it's funny that people just kind of glossing over that.
Right.
And he tweeted about this back in 2013, the nano domestic quell kill bots, if you will. And I can't help but think, again, the insertion of fluorine into some of these negative apparatuses is what's sadly helping these elites within that of the power structure to continue this form of suppression. So when people say, again, I got to be careful here, but when people say if they wanted to do, things to you, bop with we'll call it the boop bop, that everyone's being coerced into getting around the world, then why are they waiting till now to exploit this opportunity? They would have put it in the water. They would have put it in the food. Again, they would have put, my thing is, I agree, take advantage of every opportunity, and that's what they seem to be doing.
Well, exactly the end point, a final one. I want to congratulate you, Mark, on choosing the exact perfect time to have made that decision to like not drink tap water, to not, you know what I mean? Because it sounds like that's when they were really kicking it up a notch in 2014. So good timing on your part.
I didn't even know that.
No, that nano domestic quell document said 2013, 98%. By 2014, we will have 99% of the infected.
Yep.
So literally the same time you decided to. So good on you.
We could argue if that's a coincidence or not, but yeah, that's quite peculiar that same time frame fell into line with yourself, and I would dare to argue many other individuals too. That's, I guess, what we could call coincidental, but at the same time, I find it peculiar that a lot of people who we are coming across that have been, I guess you could say, awakened, enlightened, whatever you want to call it, have had this sort of their own individual and respective journeys, but into the intuition aspect and cutting off certain things was quite done in a peculiar, timely fashion relative to what we're now finding to be these secret government operations being disseminated into the public. So it's like we see, again, perfect example, how you cut off at roughly the same time that this document at least, detailed how much they were going to push out into.
And so, go ahead. No, you got it.
There's one other thing. I mean, you guys are great, and I'm so excited to go further here because I sent Dave. I sent you a picture of the little square F, right? And the number I think was 18.998.
99999. Yeah.
And
it's
then
it's a non-ending, repeating forever number, like pi, 9
right.
forever, theoretically.
But it was curious that there were 3 9s upside down, because there's a 9 in the top left corner, so we can associate that with 666.
Ooh.
6 letter in the alphabet. Then the first 2 letters or 2 numbers in that number, 18 divided by 3 is 6. 666 right there too. So I mean, numerologically, this element is strange. Plus, on top of that, I don't think you guys know this, I have a bunch of minerals. I love crystals and minerals. Well, fluoride, the mineral, like fluorite with a T is what you call it.
Right.
It's one of the only minerals that forms in a hexagonal pattern, meaning that it's like
two
pyramids on top of each other.
Right.
Like an octahedron. I think that's what it's called. It's
that's like incredible.
But it's very strange. Like like it has a strange sort of structure to it, even in mineral form.
Hexagon. That's interesting, because that we did a roundtable yesterday covering some of that, where a gentleman by the name of Chaz, based out of Russia, if I'm not mistaken, he got into that, the whole beehive thing and the whole hexagon shapes and things like this. And it's interesting you say that, Mark, because there's alleged footage from the dark web that we've dug up that apparently shows roughly late 70s, early 80s, maybe mid 80s, footage of the backside of Mars, the backside being relative to how our planet, Earth, faces Mars, hexagonal bases and very connected, and why the hexagon keeps reoccurring in nature or in this simulation or what have you. On Saturn, in clouds of Saturn.
Mars,
right. It's quite interesting. It's not a coincidence there in that regard. And the 999, again, you flip upside down with respects to numerology, divide by 3, the whole thing there. My gosh, that's phenomenal, because you look at, again, VMAT2 allegedly being the God gene associated with the pineal gland, with the spiritual the spiritual access point, if you want to call it. That's incredible.
That's exactly my point. Maybe end it here, but like, people make these numerology statements like you're just making things up, confirmation bias. But they kind of, like, if it keeps happening, like, how many coincidences before it's not a coincidence anymore?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And that's like synchromysticism, man.
Yeah.
Like, you start to notice all these patterns, and to someone who hasn't been, putting the puzzle together for as long as you, maybe it seems like, oh wow, this person's making a lot of random associations. But then you start to unfold the pattern yourself, and you're like, oh, this guy's doing the same math I am, and we're getting the same results, because there's a formula. Everything's numbered. We're living in a numerical universe, and the elements make up our universe. So let's examine them, dudes. I love this. I think this is gonna be fun. We got into a lie, and we're only at like an hour. That's perfect. You guys want to, like, maybe in a future episode, if we prepared more, do this episode longer? Where were you thinking?
Wherever. I'll be honest with you, with respects to length, I'm all for taking it as far and as long as necessary to cover every angle of the elements moving forward. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll let listeners, if you love this show, if you thought this was a cool idea for a show, get in touch with us, let us know. And if it's super popular, I'm down to make it 2 hours. And I think also, if we have a lot of information, I'm down to make it 2 hours. Today, we got to cut it to 1 hour. But guys, this was fun. And especially, I kind of just threw this one off short notice too. So if we do have a little bit more
I am amazed that we really, I believe, the connections are there. Like,
right. Exactly. I believe that the contents, the content and all the information shared in this episode will be a very good gauge to see for those that are interested. And I'm sure, you know what, Mark, I don't want to speak on behalf of the audience at the moment, but I'm pretty damn sure they will be. Yeah. I'm gonna make a bit of a, if it's cool, intro video explaining this, like the series, sort of just giving the lay of the land, sort of, and explaining to everyone that I believe this is significant in associating a lot of connections that you said seem random, but really are not in a lot of regards. So
right on. Well, dudes, I'm excited. We're going to do this every Monday, and yeah, folks, check me out at the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Unless you're listening to this on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy feed, in which case, check out Generation Z. Show them some love. Give them a follow. Subscribe to their Patreon. They got a lot of cool things going on.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to doing this again with the next element.
Right on. Yeah, I'll be in touch in the next day.
Awesome.
And
Could you stop on
I did.
Zoom?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, cool.